My name is Cynthia Magill, and I am about to read you Part 1, Chapter 2, The Big Easy of the Ethics of Judge Nadeau. Looking back, it was all just a little too easy. And not Sunday morning easy either, but tripping over a rock and splitting your head open easy. To Mary Ann, it seemed like a fairy tale. One day, the prince announced himself, and actually, that was pretty much it. Back then, the prince answered to Bob. This doesn't become funny until later. Mary Ann was swept off her feet, literally and figuratively, enthralled by her prince's proclaimed devotion. She refused to look any further than his promises. The thing was, Mary Ann trusted Bob, and during the 4 months he'd spent as her attorney, Bob had listened attentively while she poured out her life to him, sharing her deepest, darkest secrets, some of which she hadn't even told me. He had seen her rant, whine, and cry, and he had fallen in love with her anyway. And he was a judge, for crying out loud. Mary Ann was in awe of him. Her feelings of failure over getting a divorce were washed away by his assurances that her husband was the one to blame. A judge knows stuff like that. He also knows right from wrong. So no matter how Mary Ann or I might have viewed what happened that day in his office, no matter how mortifying or inappropriate it might have seemed to us, it was actually quite beautiful. A judge said so. Even I was beginning to think that Bob's feelings for Mary Ann might be genuine. I didn't necessarily agree that he was the paragon she believed him to be, but the guy did seem to be crazy about her. Of course, I hadn't actually met him yet. Remember, when I described my no news is good news philosophy with friends? Well, Mary Ann was an even bigger subscriber to that philosophy than me. When things were going good for her, particularly when she was in love, I wouldn't hear from her nearly as often as I did when her life sucked. But I was glad things were working out for her, and I was preoccupied with my own stuff. Like the grand opening of the shoe store I had foolishly decided to open in Newburyport, Massachusetts. The day after their affair in Bob's office, Mary Ann went to Pennsylvania as planned. I thought the separation would cool things down, especially for Bob, but it didn't. Mary Ann said he called her every day. Meanwhile, the news of Prince Charming bombed with Mary Ann's parents. Even with her leaving out the bits about the tampon and the tie, for them the only bright spot in Mary Ann's divorce was the prospect of having her and the kids move back to Pennsylvania. But moving back to Pennsylvania represented a last resort for Mary Ann. She was only considering it because it appeared she had no other choice. But she had a choice now. She could stay in Maine and marry a judge. Mary Ann showed her mother, who we'll call Gloria, a picture of Bob from a phone book advertisement he'd given her. Gloria scrunched up her nose. He looks old. Bob was 48, which is actually rather young for a judge, as Mary Ann was quick to point out, but still 2 decades older than Mary Ann. In fact, he was closer to Gloria's age. How did this happen? Gloria kept asking, to which Mary Ann kept selling Bob's good points. He was a family man. He was an excellent father figure for her kids. And he was a judge. But Gloria wasn't buying it. In fact, the only person Mary Ann managed to convince was herself. And once she'd wrapped her mind around the idea, it was quick to take hold. The seed had been planted and the fruit was too tempting to resist. She was enthralled with the thought of being married to a judge. She told me once that she felt a little like Grace Kelly must have when Prince Rainier proposed. I tried to look at the situation from this perspective, but all I could see was Bob's tie whacking her in the face. I think Prince Rainier would have removed his tie. Did he even wear ties? He always struck me as a casual, white linen shirt kind of guy. Mary Ann's comment about feeling like Grace Kelly brought home what disturbed me so much about the whole thing. Mary Ann was infatuated with an icon. She had looked up to Bob as an attorney, but even more so as a judge and authority figure. She seemed at a terrible disadvantage, made worse by the fact that while Bob knew everything there was to know about her, she only knew what he had chosen to reveal. And anyway, didn't Grace Kelly end up dying a horrific death? Mary Ann was crushed by her family's reaction. She felt her mother in particular should have understood. Gloria married the man who adored her and never looked back. She, too, had taken her role as a wife seriously. Mary Ann told me that her father came home each day and every day to find Gloria perfectly tricked out in her little control tops and heels, her lips shimmering with sunset coral lipstick, and her Donna Reed hair teased and sprayed to the point where it was as functional as it was stylish. Mary Ann often joked that her mother could fall down a flight of stairs without suffering a single injury to the head. Supper was always on the table by 5, and Mary Ann swears that, to this day, her father believes the sun rises and sets to his wife. It is rather charming. As far as Mary Ann knew, Gloria never considered anything different for her life, or Mary Ann's for that matter. That isn't so unusual for that generation, I suppose. Mary Ann told me that her parents spent a small fortune putting her brother through medical school, but when it came her turn, they didn't see the point in sending her to college. You can get married, her mother reasoned. Mary Ann did go to college, but the music degree she earned didn't really help her all that much. In the end, she was more like Gloria than she might have cared to admit. She wanted her mother's life. In light of all this, Mary Ann was confused by Gloria's negative attitude about this wonderful opportunity that had risen out of the ruins of her marriage. Ironically, I think it was her family's resistance that actually provided that extra little push she needed to make the leap into Bob's waiting arms, if only to prove that he really was as wonderful as she was trying so hard to convince everyone that he was. The simple truth is that the more Mary Ann talked about her relationship with Bob, the better it sounded to her. It was as if focusing on who he was washed away her mortification over what he had done to her in his office, for the moment at least. She had gone from, I just had sex with my lawyer and I don't know why, to, I'm going to marry a judge. And they hadn't even gone out on a date yet. If Mary Ann had any doubts, she was hiding them really well. It's possible that she didn't have any doubts. Bob's daily calls reinforced the carrot he was dangling before her dazzled eyes. And the carrot had been custom designed by Mary Ann herself during those long, expensive appointments in Bob's office spent pining over the perfect life for her and her children with every conversation. Bob sweetened the pot until she was babbling about a pool, horseback riding lessons for her daughter, and outdoor activities for her son. She listened to Bob's promises with both ears. She would have given him a third year if she could have. She came back from Pennsylvania early, unable to wait the full 2 weeks to see him again. They had their first real date on the night she got home, and her nervousness suddenly returned. After building him up so much in her mind, Mary Ann was a little afraid of what she might feel upon seeing him in person. She must have called me 16 times that day. They met at his office. She told me later that when she saw him, something inside her gave way. She couldn't believe he was really there. She was filled with gratitude. She said she ran across the parking lot and jumped into his arms, a little over the top for my taste, but not so out of line if you're a hopeless romantic, which she is. "Wait until we get out of the parking lot," he told her, and she backed away, embarrassed. "It's not you," he explained. "I have some catty women working in my office." Once they were out of the parking lot, Bob's demeanor changed. He pulled the car over, put it in park, and kissed her passionately. Then he took her hand in his and held it there as he resumed driving. "I'm taking you to meet my mother," he said. I thought this was a little high-handed of him, but I've been told that I'm too feminist in my thinking. Actually, Bob's the one who told me that. Meanwhile, Mary Ann was thinking that life with Bob would never be boring. She wondered if he would always be so full of surprises. He would. And even I had to admit that Mary Ann seemed to have the perfect personality to compliment a guy like Bob. I mean, how many women would just roll with something like that? Bob's mother was as thrilled with their relationship as Gloria had been. The first thing she did was ask Mary Ann why she wanted to be with a man who was so much older than her. Mary Ann let Bob explain how much they had in common. But then Bob's mother said something that put Mary Ann on alert. "Aren't you concerned that your divorce will become public once it gets out that Mary Ann was your client?" she asked Bob. Bob was quick to reassure his mother that he could handle the attorney-client issue. But Mary Ann was alarmed. What issue were they talking about? What did her being his client have to do with their relationship? They were both quiet on the ride back. It wasn't just the issue his mother had raised. Mary Ann was exhausted. She had, after all, just driven 12 hours with 2 small children. Bob was reluctant to let her go, but he finally relented when she agreed to have dinner with him the following night. It was there at Jonathan's restaurant in Agunquit that Mary Ann finally admitted the anxiety she was feeling. Everything was happening so fast. She was overwhelmed, and my nagging concerns about her divorce were starting to get to her. Bob hadn't even mentioned her case in the nearly 2 weeks that had passed. "What did he say to that?" I asked when she told me about it later. "Oh, he was so sweet," she gushed. "He said my fears are perfectly natural after being in such a dysfunctional relationship." "I wouldn't call wondering about the status of your divorce a fear," I argued. "I mean, the reality is that you still have no idea where your marital assets are." But Mary Ann was too giddy to think about marital assets. "I like 'em," she said, emphasizing the word "like," so that I would catch her meaning. "No tie slapping you in the face this time?" I joked. She laughed. "This could really work," she announced, as if as surprised by the realization as anyone. I mean, I didn't want to say anything, but deep down I was afraid I might not feel, attracted to him. But it was fantastic. "There's more to life than just sex," I reminded her. "That's just it," she said. "Everything else is already so much more than I could have hoped for. He's smart, successful, and he loves me and my kids. The list of things I love about him just goes on and on. The only thing I was worried about was the sex. But now I can check that off the list too. That's great, Mary Ann, I said. It really is. But what about your divorce? That's the one dark cloud in all this, she admitted. Bob was planning to give my case to an associate, but no one in his law firm will take the case. I thought he was the boss, I said. Can't he make someone take the case? They're claiming it would be unethical, she said, but Bob thinks it's because of his wife. I guess they all really like her. This gave me pause. I mean, a lawyer who won't take a case? Are you sure that's all it is? I asked. It's just as well, she said dismissively. I wouldn't want those busybodies working on my case anyway. Bob promised to find me a new lawyer. Well, I hope he does it soon, I said. It's going on 5 months now, and you were complaining before you went to Pennsylvania that nothing was happening on your divorce. I know, sighed Mary Ann. Do you think I'm thrilled to be starting from scratch with a new attorney? It just seems irresponsible of Bob to be so unconcerned about your case, I couldn't help remarking. It's not irresponsibility, objected Mary Ann. It's the opposite. Bob wants to be the one to take care of me and my kids. I was momentarily stunned by this, but when I recovered, I said, That's very sweet of him, Mary Ann, but even if you don't need the money now, you never know when you might. Don't worry, she said, growing frustrated with this irritating bit of reality, when all she wanted to do was to bask in the glory of being in love. I won't end up working 3 jobs like my crazy best friend. I understood how she felt, so I backed off. And speaking of jobs, I began, but I haven't gotten to the best part of our date yet, she objected. Let's see. You had great sex and he promised to find you a new attorney. How much excitement can a girl take? She giggled. Just as I was about to leave, Bob took my hand, looked me dead in the eye, and said, We're going to have the perfect life starting tomorrow. What's happening tomorrow? I asked, intrigued. We're going shopping, she said, drawing it out for effect, for the most beautiful diamond ring I've ever seen.